Hey, everybody. This is my summary of the book, The Church's Learning Community. Uh, I have found this book very, very useful because for this particular class, I have been focusing for my projects on redesigning the confirmation curriculum for my boys who are all neurodivergent. And I have another group of kids who will be coming in the next couple years, many of whom are also neurodivergent. And so this book was very important to me. So as I look up, if it looks like I'm looking up, it's because I am trying to make sure I stay on my notes. Now, Cook is asking us to shift from a focus that's more transactional based, where I give you information and you the student onboards it, and this we're moving towards that transformational model of the entirety of the community being centered around learning and spiritual growth. So we have to shift from us transmitting information as teachers to basically creating environments where people can learn. And in doing so, they shift from being just people who are believers to active disciples in the church community and in the mission field in the world beyond. Right? So, those four things, those four pillars are very critical for the learning community. And I think that we have these at Hillcrest. We do have intentional worship where we focus on encountering God's, especially through the Holy Spirit, which shapes our identity as the blessing place and focuses us on our values of loving our neighbor as ourself actively out in the world. It focuses on study. Right now, trying to make my sermons more, let's say, more biblically focused, assuming that folks do not have that are not literate in the Bible, and just trying to kind of gradually go through, in this case, the Gospel of John, and slowly begin to explain it to them and to encourage them to talk amongst themselves. And I tried to transmit this information in varying forms, short form blogs on threads, in the form of a weekly e-newsletter that goes out to our members, in the form of our monthly Spire newsletter, in the form of our sermons. And the sermon is kind of like the big deliverable, but all these other small dialogues helps to push and communicate that to a larger environment beyond our four walls. The third area is service, because if we're not doing stuff beyond the four walls, we're not really living out our faith. And what's been exciting is during this particular sermon series, we have been doing a lot of gathering snacks for our kids' schools, gathering up clothing and supplies for the people in need, volunteering at our local social agency and food shelf in the area, and at what we call Bridging, which is this nonprofit that provides furnishings and stuff for people that are moving into a new home but don't have the information or don't have the couches and chairs and stuff. And finally, fellowship. We have multiple streams of fellowship. We have our coffee hour, we have a lunch bunch, and we have Blessing Bistro, our second service, where everything is centered around food or drink and the ability to sit and communicate with one another. And in many cases, these folks are able to connect with each other and figure out places in the community, in our community, or in the community beyond, where there is need. So, our church, in essence, is the curriculum, our environment, our relationships, the traditions that we hold, and the actions of the gathered community in worship enable us to be continually in a learning mode and creating within our worshiping space this kind of like this space where we can experiment and try new things. um, some things will work, some things will fail, but that ability to constantly be breaking things in the efforts to be able to drive forward our mission, and to really focus on the fact that, our walk of sanctification as United Methodists does not stop when you're confirmed. It is a lifelong process. That baptism that we get as children, right, where we are justified and we are made right with God, born again, this is just the beginning of that journey. And it is in sanctification that we begin to move forward. So it's a lifelong, life wide deal. And the thing that I'm increasingly looking at in my in this church is the need for radical inclusivity. Now, I'm dealing with that on two different levels. Our our campus is diversifying because we've recently rented some space to a West African community. So there's been growing edges around that. We are we have many children who have been diagnosed with varying learning disabilities. And I'm starting to realize that these aren't necessarily disabilities. These are just people that are in different categories that allow them to learn differently, experience life differently, and as a result, we have to shift our learning styles and how we go about teaching so that different people can find what they need within our teaching. So, I've been really reading on this and trying to figure out this semester, what does that mean for neurodivergent children? Well, the first thing is that we have to celebrate growth and kindness, patience, and service. This notion of quiet attention, really abstract language, and then verbal recall may not work in an environment where you could have kids with intelligence levels that are sky high and kids that struggle to understand things, where they are developmentally delayed. And so you have to be able to understand that that child who may be developmentally delayed may only make small, gradual progress. The child who may be severely delayed and unable to fully comprehend is only making nuggets, little nudges. We have to celebrate that growth. And for those kids that are way up here who are able to really engage the text at higher levels, we need to challenge them and get them to grow as well. One of the things I have learned, and I'm really kind of finicky as I'm walking the floor during our Sunday school and in worship, is to de-emphasize loud music, unpredictable pacing, bright lights, long periods of sitting still. Um, that is how the megachurches operate. But for neurodivergent kids and for adults who are neurodivergent, that can be very, very distracting and can keep them from fully engaging. So what we're trying to do is provide things. So for adults who don't do well with loud noises or struggle with their hearing, we have earphones available that can kind of send the message and the worship at the volume that makes sense for them. We don't use flashy lights and big flashy light shows and loud rock band music. We stay with more piano, a little organ, very quieter places. We also don't focus, I don't try not to focus on people just sitting. I was at a point in my ministry where I was preaching for 25 to 30 minutes, and I got feedback from a few people. I had a smaller congregation in worship who were saying that they kind of tune out after 15 minutes. Now, for me, having had significant experience both in traditional Methodist churches as well as in the Word of Faith movement, where preaching from 45 minutes to an hour and a half is the norm, that was very, very frustrating to hear. But shifting that learning, right? Because it forced me to focus. I got 15 minutes. So I can, what's that one thing? In this one big sermon I've written, what's the one thing that is most important? And I hammer home on that. And what I've realized is as people leave the service, they're remembering that one thing that I hit. And at first it was just annoying because I spend a long time building my sermon, and people think that if I'm building a shorter sermon, it's easier, but in many ways, it is actually much, much harder to do. Very harder to do. And so as a result, I've had to spend more time than I would probably feel comfortable with until I can get this practice down. We're trying to do a lot more predictable worship and predictable learning opportunities so that when kids come into our Sunday school, there's a predictable pattern that is calming and that they can, that they can adapt to. Because I've learned that neurodivergent kids need to have, and developmentally delayed kids need that structured environment, but not so structured as to be smothering. So there's enough room for play and for movement and for noise, and the teachers are aware of that noise, and they know that even though there's noise, even though they're squirrely, when they ask that question, they can get that answer because those kids are paying closer attention than we give them credit for. And then the church is the curriculum. So as we're teaching in the Sunday school, and as I'm teaching in confirmation this year, we're going to extend that teaching into the sanctuary, because there are many adults who probably didn't pay attention in confirmation or never went through confirmation, and they need that information as well. And then there's those of us who have been Christians our whole life. There's nothing ever wrong with going back to the basics of faith so that you understand where you're at. And then finally, radical inclusivity. We want to be at a place, and I think we're slowly getting there, where we no longer assume that everybody learns the same way, but that we create different activities over the course of worship and over the course of our class times, where different people can engage that from different points of view, right? So how we're going about doing it, we're focusing on action over words. We'd rather have you doing stuff than sitting and listening. We want you to, we try to make sure that we're accommodating for sensory overloads that could be taking place across the campus. We are trying to find ways of engaging people in multi-sensory engagement. So I remind people of, we have the stained glass windows around us that are telling the biblical story. You're hearing the biblical story. We have Bibles in the church. You hopefully have Bibles at home where you can read it. But then when we come forward for baptism and for Eucharist, you have tangible tasting and touching of these elements that help you to experience God from all five senses. So it's a multi-sensory experience. We're creating and have created defined roles, and we match folks to those roles. I'm very fortunate here to have a bunch of retired teachers, folks who are specialized in working with neurodivergent children, so that when I have issues, I have specialists that I can call, text, and talk to about whether I'm approaching this right or wrong. And so we know that we can get it right because we have the people with the appropriate training here to get it right. And we're affirming the diverse contributions. When we hired recently for our youth leader, we purposely brought in a diverse hire, a biracial female who is very talented for this role. I've worked with her in camps for 3 years. She is incredibly skilled, has a deep love of God, and she brings a vast amount of lived experience. And the kids respect her because they've been to camp with her. They know her. So when she comes in the room, she knows they're going to be squirrely. She understands them. She can affirm that diversity in the room. But then finally, across the entire campus, the goal is whether it be worship or Sunday school, Blessing Bistro, or even our small groups, we're trying to create predictable structure so that as you walk into that group that particular month, you will know what is going on. And they try to find a way of sitting in on each small group to get to kind of learn their patterns and then, if necessary, redirect the leaders within that group to try to make those patterns more predictable. So, in essence, we are shifting the model from a traditional Sunday school model to um, a, a more expansive model of learning. And this book helped tremendously. I read this book the first time I was in seminary about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I read it, I got an A in the class, great. I absorbed nothing from it. I just went on teaching Sunday school and doing camp ministry the way I had always done it. This time, because as a role of pastor, you have to be more engaged and in the theological depth of what's going on. I was really kind of anxious for this. I thought I had this book around my house, that I kept it, but I went desperately looking around for the book earlier late this summer and I couldn't find it. So getting my hands on the book again, particularly in electronic form, so it can just go with me everywhere, has been extremely important to me. So I'm excited about this book. I'm going to keep it in my library. And that's all I've got for this week. We will talk to you later. Bye bye.